The land is liminal foundational cosmology. Picture this. You're standing on the shore where river meets ocean, where fresh water dances with salt water, where neither begins nor ends but both exist in constant fluid motion. For Two-Spirit Anishinaabe scholar Adrienne Huard, this isn't just a pretty landscape. It's a teaching about the fundamental nature of existence itself. The land dictates everything about our ways of being, Huard explains. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. This is where our exploration begins, with Indigenous wisdom that recognises something radical. Liminality isn't a temporary phase to endure. It's the sacred, permanent condition of all life. Long before European colonisers arrived with their rigid binaries, Indigenous nations across Turtle Island understood something powerful. The most important spiritual and social roles belonged to those who lived between categories. The Two-Spirit people, who embodied both masculine and feminine spirits within a single being. Even the name for the creator in Anishinaabe tells this story. Gije Manitou translates to ever-loving great mystery, a name that celebrates not knowing, that finds strength in questions rather than answers. This cosmology rejects the colonial obsession with classification and control. Instead, it embraces what Huard calls oscillating between identities, but never sitting at one side of a spectrum. The land itself models this fluidity, diverse, complex, unpredictable, refusing the fixed categories that settler colonial ideology desperately needs to function. In this worldview, to exist fluidly isn't confusion, it's wisdom. The threshold between worlds isn't a problem to solve, it's home.
Please like and subscribe for more daily videos.
The war on in-between, colonial violence against liminality. The European colonial project couldn't tolerate such fluidity. To impose its hierarchical binary order, it first had to systematically destroy the liminal wisdom it encountered. The residential school system wasn't just about forced assimilation, it was an ontological war against the very concept of existing between worlds. Children arriving at these schools were immediately subjected to rituals designed to shatter their liminal nature. Hair, deeply spiritual and symbolic, was cut. Names were replaced with English ones. Most crucially, they were rigidly segregated by gender, boys and girls forbidden from interacting. Even siblings were separated. This wasn't random cruelty. It was strategic violence aimed at the heart of Indigenous gender fluidity. Before colonisation, at least 155 distinct nations had documented multiple gender traditions. 2/3 of recorded Indigenous languages contained specific terms for people who were neither strictly men nor women. These weren't marginal figures. They were often healers, medicine people, shamans, visionaries. They were the living bridges between worlds, possessing what was called double vision, the sacred ability to see from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The colonial system specifically targeted this wisdom for extinction. Two-Spirit people were massacred, driven underground, or forced into binary gender roles through violence and public humiliation. Creation stories were rewritten to portray gender variance negatively. The sacred circle of acceptance was deliberately shattered, replaced with the linear hierarchy of heteropatriarchy. This wasn't collateral damage. It was a calculated strike against the philosophical foundation that made Indigenous societies possible. They understood something we're only beginning to grasp. To destroy liminal wisdom was to destroy Indigenous ways of being entirely. Digital reclamation, culture bombs, and virtual sovereignty. Today, something extraordinary is happening. Indigenous creators are using the colonizers' own tools to resurrect the liminal spaces that were nearly destroyed. Digital platforms, social media, contemporary art forms, they're becoming weapons of cultural resurrection. This isn't a simple return to the past. It's a creative fusion that collapses linear time and creates new forms of cultural sovereignty. Take James Jones, known as Notorious Cree on social media. He deploys what he calls culture bombs, viral videos that blend traditional hoop dancing with hip-hop aesthetics, sacred teachings with TikTok's viral logic. His hoops represent the interconnectedness of body, mind, spirit, and ancestors. But his platform reaches millions globally. He's creating a new kind of liminal space, simultaneously ceremonial and accessible, ancient and immediate. Similarly, two-spirit Wollastockic tenor Jeremy Dutcher has created something miraculous. He takes archival wax cylinder, the recordings of his ancestors from the early 20th century, and weaves their voices into contemporary classical compositions. His music is a time machine, a sacred portal where past and present, ancestor and descendant exist in dialogue. Informed by his two-spirit identity, Dutcher describes this work as medicine, reclamation and revolution, transforming the colonial archive from a tool of cultural death into a source of living revitalization. These creators aren't seeking inclusion in colonial structures. They're generating what scholar Leanne Betasamosaki-Simpson calls generative refusal, turning away from the settler state to regenerate indigenous worlds on their own terms. They've learned to weaponize their liminality, transforming a position of historical marginalization into a site of profound creative and political power. The threshold becomes a launching pad. The power of permanent liminality. What these creators understand, and what the Western world is only beginning to grasp, is revolutionary. Liminality isn't a problem to be solved. It's a superpower to be cultivated. Two-spirit identity functions as what we might call permanent liminality, a sustained refusal to be categorized, controlled or contained by the binary logic of colonial systems. This creates what anthropologist Victor Turner called anti-structure, a form of social organization that exists in direct opposition to rigid hierarchies. But where Turner saw liminality as necessarily temporary, two-spirit identity proves it can be sustained, becoming a continuous source of innovation and resistance. The transformation is profound. The void of being outside colonial structures isn't empty. It's actively filled with ancestral knowledge, spiritual power, and what scholars call a braided resiliency framework. The disorientation isn't confusion. It's the rejection of a false colonial orientation. The ambiguity isn't weakness. It's sacred complexity that generates new possibilities for existing. Artist Kent Monkman's alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle, perfectly embodies this power. As a gender-fluid, time-travelling two-spirit trickster, Mischief exists outside linear history and colonial gender norms. These aren't just artistic statements. They're ceremonial acts that create liminoid experiences for viewers, forcing them to confront the artificiality of the colonial project, opening space for Indigenous futures to emerge. The message is clear. The space between worlds isn't a place of exile. It's a place of power, of creativity, of infinite possibility. When you refuse to be contained, you become uncontainable. As we move deeper into our exploration of liminal space this week, the Indigenous teaching becomes clear. The space between worlds isn't a temporary way station. It's home. It's the place where all real transformation happens, where creativity is born, where different ways of being become possible. The two-spirit resurgence offers a crucial lesson for anyone navigating change, transition, or crisis in the modern world. Instead of rushing to escape uncertainty or forcing premature resolution, what if we learned to inhabit the in-between space with grace? What if we discovered, like the land itself teaches, that fluidity is not instability but a more sophisticated form of strength? Tomorrow, we'll explore how existential philosophy arrived at the same conclusion through a completely different path, revealing that the human condition itself is fundamentally liminal, that we're all living permanently between the thresholds of birth and death. But today's lesson from Indigenous wisdom provides the foundation. The space between worlds isn't empty. It's sacred, it's generative. And in a world desperately trying to force everything into rigid categories, the power to exist fluidly might be exactly what we need. To be, as Adrian Heward says, never stationary and always growing. This might be how we not just survive, but thrive. The threshold calls. The question isn't whether you'll cross it. It's whether you'll recognise that you're already standing on it, and always have been. The land taught us this first. The two-spirit ancestors carried this wisdom forward. Now it's our turn to learn what it means to live between worlds, and discover that between worlds is exactly where we belong.